Nolan Walls disappeared on July 4th, but before authorities could fully establish what had happened to him, his phone was already somewhere else. It was moving between locations, people were making calls, families were confronting one another. A boat became part of the search, and the timeline surrounding the first hours of Nolan's disappearance began producing contradictions that an online investigator says deserve much closer scrutiny. But one of the most important questions begins with the person who says he made the very first call.
Then the question becomes, why would they alter this video? And the only thing that logically makes sense to me is to alter the identity of the two girls. Because if Carter is the boy in red, Wyatt is the boy in the American shorts, Bart's brother Brooke being the one in the navy blue shorts, and then Ike being the one in the teal shorts. Then we've got Warren up here with somebody in this red striped swimsuit and the girl in the teal swimsuit with the backwards hat.
Lauren's statement places him at the center of the first communication with Nolan's mother. And that sounds reassuring. A friend realizes Nolan is missing. He calls his mother, he tells her what he knows, he tries to get help. But there's another part of the story that changes the picture. Because according to the accounts reviewed by the TikTok Investigator, Christine was already seeing something Warren's explanation did not immediately account for. Nolan's phone was showing up on land, not with Nolan, not where everyone expected him to be, and not simply sitting where it had supposedly been left. The phone had become a separate character in the timeline. And once that happens, every movement matters. This is not a story about one suspicious photograph. It isn't about one awkward sentence. And it isn't about declaring someone guilty because an internet investigator believes two statements don't match. It's about something much more basic. A missing teenager, a phone that remained behind, multiple locations, conflicting recollections, a boat, an emergency call, and a period of time that still demands a cleaner explanation. The TikTok Investigator reviewing Warren Hudson, Morgan, Jax, Wyatt, and the surrounding accounts believes several details don't fit comfortably together. Some of those observations are potentially significant, others remain theories, and some could ultimately have completely innocent explanation. That's why tonight we're going to separate them. What was actually said, what the investigator believes it means, and what the available timeline can and cannot prove. Because the most important question isn't whether the internet has already solved Nolan Wells' case. It hasn't. The important question is whether the unanswered pieces can eventually be reconciled with the evidence. And everything begins with Nolan's phone. According to the accounts in the supplied interviews, Nolan's friends were at an Independence Day gathering when the group realized Nolan was missing. Warren says he contacted Christine, but the phone was already creating a problem. Christine was using Life 360 to see Nolan's location, and according to the account discussed by the investigator, the location indicated that Nolan's phone was on land. That was strange because Nolan himself was believed to have been on Horn Island. So Christine needed an answer. Where was her son? And if he wasn't there, why was his phone? Warren's explanation was that Nolan had left the phone with them, but the investigator focuses on exactly when that information was, because according to the competing accounts, Christine raised the Life 360 location before receiving the full explanation about the phone. That creates an important investigative question. Was Warren voluntarily explaining the friend's location? Or was he responding to information Christine had already discovered herself?
So in this picture, this would be Brooks, this would be Ike, this would be Wyatt, this would be Warren, which would leave this to be Carter. Now, whoever this is seems to be very cuddly with Carter. Like, too cuddly, in my opinion, for it to be like a mother or a family member. Thinking about it a lot from the timeline that we have been told, and
there is an important distinction here. This statement does not establish that Warren was lying. It establishes that there are different descriptions of the same conversation. And when a missing person investigation depends heavily on the sequence of phone calls, even small differences can become important, because the next issue involves the Coast Guard. Lauren reportedly told Christine that he knew someone connected to the Coast Guard and that he would contact them. The investigator considers that wording significant, because saying you know somebody in the Coast Guard isn't necessarily the same thing as making an official emergency call. One could be a personal contact, the other could initiate an official response. And according to the material discussed in the transcripts, there was confusion surrounding when the Coast Guard actually received an official call. That leaves an unexplained question around the early timeline. When did the first communication happen? Who was contacted? What was actually said? And was the first call an official emergency report or simply an attempt to reach someone personally known to the group? Those questions matter because they determine where the documented emergency timeline actually begins. And while those questions were developing, Nolan's phone was moving. The next major shift happens when people begin arriving at Jax's house.
Morgan describes receiving a call from someone they knew. That person was asking where Nolan was, where the group had last seen him, and where they were now. The encounter that followed was reportedly confrontational.
Where we came from originally, and we turned into Fort Bayou, went in the channel, ran probably 500, 600 yards into Fort Bayou. I jumped out of the boat, put the plug back in the boat so access water. So water didn't keep pushing and filling back the boat.
According to their own words, they went into the mouth and then they turned and they went about 500-600 feet. Now, mind you, The party house is right around, but they go past it and then loop back around. However, Warren just admitted that at some point they had to stop and Wyatt jumped in. And even then, you heard him stuttering over the story. Like, it wasn't a smooth transition because I think they dropped her off.
This is one of the moments where the timeline becomes difficult to follow, because according to the account, multiple people eventually arrived at the house. They wanted Nolan's phone, they wanted information, and they wanted the location of Wyatt's boat. That matters because the investigation was no longer confined to one missing person. Now there were multiple properties, multiple groups of people, and a physical search connected to the boat. But Morgan's account contains another important detail: the photograph. He says the person who called had seen a picture circulating on Snapchat, and the investigator immediately noticed a problem with the timing. The picture being discussed was reportedly posted publicly on July 5th. So how could someone describe it as circulating on Snapchat during the night of July 4th? There are several possible explanations. The speaker could have confused the dates. The picture could have been privately shared before being publicly posted, or the recollection could simply be inaccurate. None of those possibilities should be dismissed without checking the original digital records. But the timestamp deserves examination, because digital evidence has one advantage over memory: it leaves a trail. According to the interview, the confrontation eventually moved toward Wyatt's property. The group had obtained the address of the boat, and then, according to the account, Wyatt became concerned that people were heading toward his house. His parents were reportedly there, and instead of waiting to see what would happen, he contacted 911.
The next post above it are the same pictures but better quality. Why did it take so long to get these pictures to them? Oh, and y'all, now that I said that, I realize, so all of these pictures had to come from the same digital camera, right? Meaning this picture did as well. And since I've already proven that this picture had used AI to do something weird because, there was no little...
That call is important for one reason: it shows how quickly the situation had escalated. But it also raises another question. Why was the emergency call described primarily around people approaching the house rather than Nolan's disappearance itself? That doesn't prove anything improper happened. A teenager could reasonably be threatened by a large group approaching his family home, but investigators would still want to know exactly when the call occurred, what was reported, and how it fits with the missing person timeline. Because according to the accounts, law enforcement eventually arrived, people were questioned, and the boat became part of the immediate search. Yet the broader missing person response was still developing. And that takes us to the statements of the people who are closest to the timeline. The TikTok investigator spends considerable time examining Warren's statements about cell service. In one part of the interview, Warren explains that contacting his mother was difficult. He says he had to try repeatedly.
If you're motivated enough to do it, yeah. Like, I made a phone call to my mom, and I had to call her like 8 times before she picked up, because either her service was bad, because she was on the back side of the aisle on the south side, or my service was bad, and it was just hard to get through.
Do y'all see that? Let me play it again slower for you.
Either her service was bad, because she was on the back side of the aisle on the south side, or my service was bad, and it was just hard to get through.
Oh no! Not only did Warren confirm that his mom was on the south side of the island, but Warren himself said that if you're motivated enough, you can call somebody. I tried calling my mom 8 times. Yet this is what he said last time.
A little off the island, you have cell coverage, and even on the island, like I called my mom when we were on the island, it was fine.
So which is...
That statement is significant because the investigator compares it with another portion of Warren's interview in which he describes calling his mother while on the island and indicates that communication was possible. At first glance, those statements sound difficult to reconcile, but again, there is an important distinction. A person can have intermittent service. One call can succeed while another fails. A person can move around the island and suddenly find better reception. So the discrepancy is worth investigating, but it should not automatically be treated as proof of deception. The strongest test would be the actual call records. If those records exist, they could establish whether Warren attempted the calls he described, when he attempted them, and how long they lasted. That would be far more reliable than simply analyzing how a sentence sounded in an interview. And Warren isn't the only person whose statements become important. The boat is where the timeline becomes especially complicated. The young men described mechanical problems. The bilge system became part of the explanation. The motor and electronics reportedly experienced difficulties, and a Coast Guard or STO-related communication became part of the story. But the TikTok investigator focuses on something different. She compares what Jack says happened during the call with what she believes can be available footage.
Because listen.
And he's on the phone with Cito, and he's trying to get them on the phone. And as he stated in the moment, he's like, Cito's just asking all these dumb questions. I can't figure out what's going on. And so finally hangs up, and after the trim to the motor started to work again. So they manually trim it down by the buttons on the motor, trimmed it down, and some electronics started to come back on.
Jax's account describes questions being asked during the call and the boat eventually becoming operational again. But the investigator says she listened to the longer recording and believes the description doesn't match what can actually be heard. That's an allegation about the interpretation of the footage and audio, not an established finding. Still, there is a second issue. The investigator points to footage showing a line being pulled in while the call appears to be underway. If that interpretation is correct, it could suggest that another vessel was involved during part of the sequence, and that would raise a straightforward investigative question: who was on that vessel? Because another boat means another potential witness, another perspective, another timeline, and potentially another source of evidence. The interview accounts also describe what happened after the boat began moving again. According to the supplied material, the group traveled toward the mouth of Fort Bayou and then went farther into the channel before returning. The explanation involves stopping and dealing with water entering the boat. But the investigator questions why the route unfolded the way it did. If the goal was simply to return safely, why make additional movements? Why stop? Why enter the channel? And who was present during each stage?
These are legitimate timeline questions, but they become dangerous when speculation fills in missing information. The fact that a route seems unusual does not tell us why it happened. For that, GPS data and contemporaneous records are much more important. And the same principle applies to the photographs that have become a major part of the online investigation. The TikTok investigator has argued that some photographs may have been digitally altered. She points to differences involving poles, rails, clothing, and other visible details. She also questions whether a woman's identity may have been intentionally obscured. But there is a major problem with making that conclusion too quickly. A social media image can be resized, compressed, cropped, re-encoded, edited, or reposted through multiple platforms. None of that automatically means someone was hiding evidence. So instead of asking, is this definitely AI? The better questions are, where is the original file? What does the metadata show? Was the image edited? If it was edited, when? By whom? And what exactly was changed?
And it was just hard to get through.
Do y'all see that? Let me play it again slower for you.
Either her service was bad, she was on the back side of the aisle, on the south side, or my service was bad, and it was just hard to get through.
Oh no! Not only did Warren confirm that his mom was on the south side of the island, but Warren himself said that if you're motivated enough, you can call somebody. I tried calling my mom 8 times, yet this is what he said last time.
That interview segment becomes relevant because it concerns the photograph and the recollection surrounding Nolan's clothing. And clothing can matter in a missing person investigation. But even here, memory can shift under stress. One person may remember dark blue, another may remember black. A photograph may resolve the disagreement, or it may create another one. The point is not to force every inconsistency into a theory. The point is to determine which inconsistencies can be independently verified. Then there is the unidentified woman. The investigator has suggested that a woman visible in photographs could have been connected to the group in ways that have not been fully explained. She has also raised theories about whether the woman could be related to one of the young men. But at this point, those are theories. There is not enough information in the supplied material to state her identity as fact. The same caution applies to the fourth boat. The investigator believes the photographs may show another vessel. If independently confirmed, that could be important. But a fourth boat does not automatically tell us what happened to Nolan. It tells us that investigators may need to identify everyone who is on the water. And that brings us back to the people law enforcement reportedly spoke with. The supplied material includes an early description that Nolan had been seen in the company of an unknown female. But other statements attributed to Morgan, Jackson, Warren indicate they did not travel to the island on the same boat as Nolan. That creates a question that should be answered by records. Who exactly did the deputies interview when they were told Nolan had been with an unknown woman? Because if the people now describing the timeline weren't the witnesses who supplied that information, then identifying those original witnesses becomes extremely important. Now we can finally put the pieces together. Nolan is missing. His phone is somewhere on land. Christine is monitoring the location. Warren says he makes contact. The phone becomes part of a confrontation. People move between properties. Wyatt contacts 911. The boat becomes part of the search. And the Coast Guard timeline becomes a point of dispute. This is where the roughly 90-minute window becomes so important. Not because we know what happened inside it, we don't, but because it sits between the earliest reported communications and the later official response described in the supplied accounts. During that period, there are questions about who had Nolan's phone, who knew it was missing, who was communicating with Christine, who contacted emergency services, where the different groups were, what happened at the houses, what happened at the boat, and whether another vessel or additional witnesses were present. Those questions don't prove a conspiracy, they don't prove murder, and they don't establish that Warren, Jax, Morgan, Wyatt, or anyone else caused Nolan's death. But they do identify exactly where the investigation needs precision. Records, not theories. So let's strip away everything the internet has added. What is established by the material we're working from? Nolan Wells disappeared during the July 4th weekend. His phone became a major part of the timeline. His friends gave interviews describing what happened. People moved between multiple locations during the night. A 911 call became part of the response. A boat and its mechanical problems became central to the explanation. Photographs and digital material have been examined by an online investigator, and questions remain about the sequence of communications and movements. What remains disputed? The exact timing of certain calls. What was communicated to Christine and when? The precise movement of Nolan's phone, the timing and nature of the Coast Guard communication, what the boat footage actually proves, whether any photographs were digitally altered, and who exactly was present during every stage of the night. And what remains theory? That the friends deliberately coordinated a story, that someone intentionally manipulated photographs, that the unidentified woman played a role, that another boat was involved in something significant. Those possibilities can be investigated, but they cannot simply be promoted from theory to fact because they make the story more dramatic. And that's the most important distinction in this entire case. The TikTok investigator believes the contradictions point towards something much darker. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. What matters is whether the underlying evidence can answer the questions the interviews have created. Because a contradiction isn't a conviction, a suspicious photograph isn't proof, and an unexplained timeline isn't automatically evidence of a crime. But when a teenager disappears, his phone moves without him, different accounts describe the same hours differently, and a critical window remains difficult to reconstruct, those questions deserve answers. There are still parts of the timeline that need clearer explanation. And the question isn't whether an online investigator has solved Nolan Wells' death. She hasn't. The real question is much harder. What happened during that unexplained window, and what evidence could finally tell us? If you want us to keep following the verified developments and unanswered questions in the Nolan Wells case, subscribe and turn on notifications. And tell us in the comments, which part of the timeline deserves the closest scrutiny? The phone, the conflicting statements, the boat, or the 90-minute window? Because this case isn't finished, and neither are the questions.